The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. That observation, often attributed to Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw, captures a situation most of us have experienced. Have you ever been absolutely certain you communicated something clearly, only to discover the message was completely misunderstood? I once learned this lesson in a very memorable way. In 2005, I was living on the grounds of a gated middle school in China. During the Chinese New Year holiday, the campus emptied out. I returned from vacation a week early. At the gate, one of the guards offered to carry my suitcase to my apartment. It was heavy. I lived 4 flights up in a walk-up building. So when he said, "I'll come up in about 20 minutes, I gratefully agreed. When I reached my apartment, I discovered something important. The heat had been turned off for the holiday. Now remember, this was winter. I was fully dressed in winter clothes and a coat, and I was still cold, very cold. The campus was deserted, and suddenly I began to panic. I couldn't imagine sleeping in that apartment for an hour, much less a week. So I started rehearsing what I would say to the guard when he arrived. There was just one small challenge. He didn't speak English, and my Chinese at the time was extremely basic. But I was confident. After all, I could communicate with body language, right? So I waited for him at the door. The moment he reached the 4th floor landing, I began gesturing dramatically. I wrapped my arms around myself. I rubbed my hands up and down my arms, and I pointed urgently into my apartment. Cold, very cold. The guard stopped. He stared at me for a moment. Then he looked at me in a very strange way, dropped my suitcase, and ran. Not walked, ran. Before I could even process what had happened, my phone rang. One of the other guards at the gate had called an administrator to let them know I had returned, and they had arranged for me to visit an English-speaking teacher's home for the evening. So in the middle of the New Year celebrations, I completely forgot about the guard and the dramatic exit. Until later. Because apparently, in my mind, I was communicating that I was cold and that the apartment had no heat. But in his mind, he had seen enough American movies to conclude that an American woman standing in the doorway, hugging herself and rubbing her arms while pointing toward her apartment was making a very different kind of invitation. That is an extreme example of miscommunication, but it illustrates the first challenge in communication. We assume we see and hear things clearly, but in reality, we interpret what we see and hear through many filters: our language, our culture, our experiences, our expectations. 2 people can observe the same thing and interpret it completely differently. You may have seen the famous illustration where one group insists they see the number 6, while another group is equally convinced they see the number 9. Both groups are certain. Both are sincere. Both are seeing from their own perspective. Until someone asks a simple question, what are you seeing from where you stand? Communication styles create similar challenges. Researchers often describe 4 common communication styles: direct, supportive, analytical, and initiating. The direct communicator focuses on results. They value clarity, speed, and decisions. They listen for one thing: what are we going to do? The supportive communicator focuses on relationships. They pay attention to feelings and harmony. They often listen for something different. How is everyone doing with this? The analytical communicator focuses on logic and accuracy. They want details and evidence. They listen for, do we really understand the problem? And then there's the initiating communicator. Initiating communicators are enthusiastic, energetic, and expressive. They enjoy brainstorming and storytelling. They listen for possibilities. Hey, this could be interesting. None of these styles are wrong, but they can make listening surprisingly difficult. Imagine a meeting where someone says, let's make a decision and move forward. That's the direct communicator speaking. The initiating communicator says, great idea, but first let me tell you something interesting that happened in another project. 5 minutes later, the story is still unfolding. The direct communicator is looking at their watch. And somewhere in the room, an analytical communicator is thinking, we still haven't clearly defined the problem. No one is trying to be difficult. They're simply listening for different things. Direct communicators listen for action. Analytical communicators listen for accuracy. Supportive communicators listen for emotions. Initiating communicators listen for energy and ideas. So even when everyone is listening, they may not be hearing the same message. Which brings us back to George Bernard Shaw's observation. The illusion of communication occurs when we assume that saying something clearly means it has been understood. But communication is not complete when a sentence is spoken. Communication is complete when the message is understood. And sometimes that requires something more difficult than speaking. It requires curiosity. It requires asking, what are you seeing from where you stand? Because when we begin to recognize that people listen through different styles, something interesting happens. Conversations become easier. Misunderstandings become fewer. And the illusion that communication has taken place is replaced by something far more valuable. Communication that actually has.